This is the most powerful inmate I've ever seen. All the guards in the state have to ask him for help. The warden relies on him for paperwork. He's also a banker. He is educated, experienced and knows how to plan. But such a powerful man, how did he get put in jail? It turns out that he was framed by someone. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Then he was imprisoned in Shark Fort Prison. He met Big Black, who could get anything here. He asked him to get himself a small stone hammer. When Big Black saw the hammer, he jokingly said, "Use this to dig a hole to escape from prison, estimated 600 years to dig." He was also targeted by the three sisters in prison whenever there is an opportunity to find him in trouble. Until this day, Day and Andy were working outdoors. Heard the prison guard said he wanted to buy a car, but need to pay a large amount of tax. Hearing this, Andy was excited. This is his old job, so he ignored his cellmates to stop him. He went up to the guard and said, "I can help you write documents to circumvent the process, so that you can give you a tax exemption, but only if you buy the guys a beer." So on the morning of the second day, the toughest prison guard in the prison, he bought them 2 buckets full of cold beer. That day, the three sisters barricaded Andy in his room. Andy would rather die than obey, so they beat her up, and put her in the infirmary for a month. The drunken guards found out about it. The three sisters were beaten to death. The next life can only be spent in a wheelchair. From then on, no one dared to mess with Andy. Andy also got one from Big Black. Beauty poster on the wall. Maybe he wanted to add some fun to the boring life in prison to add some fun. One day the warden came to check the room. He said he was checking his cell, but in fact he came to find out what Andy was up to. He came to Andy's cell, looking at the posters on the wall. He said he didn't approve of it, but it wouldn't hurt to make an exception. Then he looked at the Bible in his hand and took it. As he was leaving, he handed it back to him, and said sarcastically, "The way to salvation is in it." Soon after, Andy was transferred to the rundown library. Soon he was asked to help. The guard wanted him to apply for his son's education fund, and when he got drunk, Andy told him he could go to Harvard or Yale. This made the guard happy and nodded to Andy. The inmates looked on in amazement. Andy tried to ask the warden for money to reorganize the library, but he was laughed at by his fellow inmates. He said that the warden is a man who only gets in and doesn't get out, to get him to pay for it, unless the video has more than 1 million likes. When he was drunk, Andy had to write to the state 1 letter a week for 6 years, finally waited for the grant, and wrote back to him saying, "Don't make him write again." But this made Andy even more energetic. He decided to write twice a week from now on. This man is a ruthless man. He transformed a dilapidated prison library into a luxury lounge, and locked the guards in the toilets. He played music on the radio for the inmates. He didn't even care when the warden came. He just crossed his legs, enjoying the short and free time, and so the number of people seeking his help grew. From guards to wardens, every day was like working in an office. When he was busy, he could get 2 assistants, and thanks to Andy's help, the warden was in every magazine and newspaper. The prison implemented a new drunken service policy. This also allowed the warden to make a lot of money. The black money had to be laundered through Andy's hands. He used stocks, securities, municipal bonds, etc. A black money to become legal, and then single-handedly creates a virtual person. He has a birth certificate, a diploma, any kind of document, but he only kept it in his files to avoid detection. The funny thing is that he's honest and upright on the outside, but in prison, he helps the warden commit crimes. One day a new group of prisoners arrived at the prison. There was a repeat thief in there. He had served years in major prisons. He soon became acquainted with Day and the others. One day when he was talking with Big Black, he learned that Andy was a big banker. He then told the story of a man he met in prison. The man said he had shot and killed a banker's wife and her lover. The banker became a scapegoat when he got drunk. Andy was immediately upset after hearing that. He immediately went to the warden. He demanded that he find the man and clear his name. The warden naturally did not agree. Andy said, "You let me out of here. I promise I won't expose your crime of embezzlement." This triggered the warden's scales. He thought Andy was threatening him. He was furious and sentenced him to a month of solitary confinement. And then he found the habitual thief. Then he found the thief and tricked him into going outside the prison to find out the truth. After learning that he was telling the truth, then he ordered his execution. He was shot for trying to escape from prison. Then the warden found Andy, tell him all this, and threatened him to continue working for him or his friends. The library he maintains will suffer, and the inmates would come and bully him. Released, Andy found Big Black. He said some inexplicable things to him. "I just didn't think it would take that long to scratch." He also said that if he gets out, he said he would go to live on an island in the Pacific Ocean. It is a warm place without memories, and told him that if he passed parole, He would go to Buxton Barley Field. There's a stone wall there. There's a black glass stone under the wall. I left something there for you. Big Black asked again and again, but Andy turned around and walked away. During the meal, Day told his cellmate Andy was different from usual. He also learned from his cellmate Andy once asked him for a section of rope. Now the inmates began to worry. After all, there is a limit to human patience. This is the best prisoner I've ever seen. He gave the warden false accounts at night. Then he went back to his cell as usual. When the guards started the roll call early the next morning, all the prisoners were standing at the door. He was the only one who didn't come out. When the guards came to check, he was dumbfounded. Where was he? He flew away. Then the warden came to Andy's cell. He also brought Big Black to question him. A furious warden, venting his emotions in the cell, inadvertently found the wall posters are actually empty. Behind the wall was dug out a big hole. He hurriedly sent someone to look for it, but all he found were torn prison uniforms and a rotten stone hammer. He used this hammer. It took him 19 years to dig this tunnel. But how come no one found it after all this time? Andy first used the posters to block the hole in the wall, and then every day when he wandered around the playground, throwing the debris into the playground little by little, day after day, he persisted. Finally, the tunnel was opened. The death of the thief made him decide to leave the prison. That night, he switched the warden's papers. Then, after lights out, he tied the papers to his legs, crawled down the tunnel to the sewer pipe. During thunderstorms, he hit the pipe with a rock, using the sound of thunder to drown out the pounding to break the pipes. Get drunk and hold the stench. Crawling towards freedom, he crawled into the river. He washed his body of dirt. At this moment he was free. On the second day, a man in a suit, he appeared in a bank. Yes, he was Andy's imaginary person. He only existed in the files. He first withdrew millions of dollars from the bank. Then he asked the clerk to mail him a document. The next day, it was in the paper. The warden of Shark's Castle was embezzling. The warden knew he was in deep shit. He opened the safe and wanted to see what was inside. He took it out and opened it to a page that read, "Dear Warden, you're right. The way to salvation is in it." Open it again and find that this book Andy used to hide the small hammer. The warden looked outside at his captors. He chose to kill himself. After that, Big Black received a letter from Andy, and at that time Andy was driving the caravan on the beach. He also became the subject of conversation among his fellow inmates after dinner. This also makes Big Black some sadness. But after all, some birds can't be locked up. Their wings are too glorious. When they fly away, you will sincerely wish him to fly to freedom. After another long time, Big Black was granted parole. After decades of isolation from the world in prison, tried to adapt to society but couldn't do it. Good thing he remembered what Andy had told him. He found the wheat field. He found the black glass stone under the stone wall. And he found what Andy had left him. Shortly after, Big Black found his old friend Andy on a beach. He found his old friend Andy, and his letter to Big Black said, "Hope is a good thing. It is the best thing on earth. Good things never die." This movie, the first in the history of cinema, tells us fear can make you a prisoner. Hope will set you free. We highly recommend watching the original film.